Today, we explore how this date completely reshaped our world across five powerful dimensions: culture, education, finance, politics, and technology. This day proves that history never rests. Let's dive into the fascinating interconnected events of this date that continue to influence how we live, think, and innovate today. So, without much further ado, let's go.
So I want you to imagine that you are standing on this dusty, totally windswept hillside.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Yeah, it's Los Angeles, and the year is 1944. There is this massive windstorm just tearing through the canyon.
Oh, wow.
Right, and right in front of you, this towering, heavily rusted piece of sheet metal just groans, snaps off, and comes completely crashing down into the brush.
Yikes. That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It really was. And that piece of metal was actually the letter H from this dilapidated, just falling apart billboard that the locals had basically considered a massive neighborhood eyesore for years.
Just total garbage at that point.
Exactly, just garbage.
No.
And yet, somehow, this rusting pile of localized junk is about to become a pristine, permanent, global monument.
You know, it's such a great image, and I think it perfectly captures the illusion of history, really.
How so?
Because we always look at the permanent pillars of our society, right? Like our revered institutions, our historic laws, our grand cultural monuments.
Yeah.
And we just assume they were built with this incredible foresight. Like there was
Yeah.
some master architect meticulously drafting blueprints for eternity.
Right. But then when you actually step into the historical record, suddenly those pristine blueprints look a lot more like, I don't know, panicked scribbles on a napkin in a burning room.
They really do.
Which brings us to the sources we are looking at for your deep dive today. And we really have an incredibly eclectic stack of documents for this one.
Oh, it is a wild mix.
Truly. We are pulling from a Brookings Institution paper analyzing the 2008 financial crisis. We've got Wikipedia entries covering both the 1985 Live Aid concert and the founding of the University of Pennsylvania.
Have a weird combo. Yeah.
Right. Plus a Smithsonian article on the bizarre history of the Hollywood sign and National Archives records covering the Northwest Ordinance and the French Revolution.
Like I said, on the surface, it is the absolute definition of a historical mixed bag. I mean, a dense financial white paper sitting right next to an article about an 80s pop concert.
Yeah.
But there is actually a brilliant hidden thread connecting them all for you today.
And that is our mission. We are going to extract the ultimate insight from this crazy mix of sources.
Huh?
We want to show how the most permanent foundational pillars of our society almost always start out as, like, desperate crisis management or temporary duct tape fixes.
Or just blatant promotional stunts.
Exactly. Oh, and I should mention, there is a very spooky historical coincidence hidden in your sources today.
Oh, yeah, the date.
Yes, an eerie number of these world-changing pivots happened on or exactly around one very specific date, which is July 13th.
It is wild how often that date pops up.
It really is. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's unpack this. How exactly does history get forged in the fires of unintended consequences?
Well, to really understand the mechanics of that, I think we need to look at how things designed for a fleeting, highly specific moment can accidentally, put down roots and just refuse to leave.
Right.
And honestly, there is no better place to start than with physical structures. So let's look closer at that billboard you mentioned on Mount Lee.
The Hollywood sign. So, according to the Smithsonian article in our sources, it was erected in 1923.
Yeah, 1923.
And today, obviously, it is this glowing worldwide symbol of cinema and glamour. But our sources point out it actually had absolutely nothing to do with the movie.
None whatsoever. I mean, it was built as this massive $21,000 billboard featuring like 4,000 individual light bulbs.
Which was a huge amount of money back then.
Oh, huge. And it was built purely to advertise an upscale suburban housing development called Hollywoodland.
Hollywoodland.
Right. And here is the really crucial part. because it was just a marketing stunt to sell real estate, the developers only expected it to stay up for about 18 months.
Wait, 18 months? So they just used materials meant for a quick temporary campaign and then left it there?
Precisely. I mean, because it wasn't engineered to last, it immediately began to decay once those 18 months were up and the maintenance stopped.
Wow.
For decades, it was just this resting badge of dishonor on the hill. The Smithsonian article notes it lost its second O in a 1936 windstorm.
And then, as I mentioned in the intro, it lost its H in 1944 to another storm.
Right.
Which, I have to point out, the Smithsonian article actually uses to definitively debunk that really great urban legend.
Oh, the car crash one.
Yeah. People always say a drunken caretaker named Albert Kothe crashed his car into the H and destroyed it.
It's a great story.
It is, but the historical record says nope, it was literally just the wind blowing down a cheap, neglected structure.
Yeah, and its status as this totally ignored, decaying billboard made it a prime target for alterations too, because nobody cared about it. In 1976, an art student named Danny Finegood famously draped fabric over the letters.
Oh, to make it say Hollyweed, right.
Exactly, to celebrate relaxed marijuana laws. It wasn't until 1978 that it actually became the permanent protected structure that we know today.
So how did that even happen? Like, who finally steps in to save a falling apart real estate billboard?
Believe it or not, it took a fundraiser spearheaded by Playboy founder Hugh Hefner.
Oh.
Yeah, they essentially optioned off the letters. Celebrity-sponsored individual replacement letters at $27,700 apiece.
That is incredibly specific.
Right, but that's what it took so the sign could finally be rebuilt in heavy-duty steel and concrete.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. It is exactly like renting a billboard to advertise a weekend garage sale, forgetting to take it down, and somehow accidentally creating a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You just don't get to choose what history decides to keep. And what really blows my mind is that this exact same accidental permanence happens with highly revered institutions too, like higher education.
Oh, absolutely it does. The origins of the University of Pennsylvania are a perfect example of this.
UPenn.
Yeah. Today, UPenn is this incredibly prestigious Ivy League research university. But if you rewind to 1740, a group of Philadelphians hired a man named Edmund Woolley to construct the largest building in the entire city.
Let me guess, it was not designed to be a university.
Not even close. It was a massive preaching hall for George Whitefield, who was a hugely popular traveling evangelist at the time.
Okay.
They just wanted a venue big enough to hold his massive crowds.
So they were basically trying to build an 18th century megachurch.
Exactly. But the funds ran dry before they could really establish it. So this giant cavernous building just sat vacant for nearly a decade.
Wow.
It was a massive real estate flop. It wasn't until 1749 that Benjamin Franklin published a pamphlet proposing a public academy for the youth of Pennsylvania.
Ben Franklin, of course.
Right, he was looking for a location, realized this empty preaching hall was just sitting there gathering dust, and saw a great opportunity for cheap real estate.
So he just repurposed a failed church into a school simply because the building was already there.
Yes. And this actually brings us to our first connection to that specific date.
Oh, July 13th.
Yep. On July 13, 1753, a charity school was chartered at that location, joining the academy. And over time, that repurposed hall evolved into the premier university we know today.
That's crazy.
It gets better.
Mm-hmm.
By 1765, they had set up a dormitory run by a chief master named Ebenezer Kinnersley.
Okay.
His official duties obviously included disciplining students, but he was also specifically tasked with managing their personal hygiene and washing their dirty laundry.
Wait. So an Ivy League institution, like a pillar of global academia, literally started as a bankrupt, abandoned preaching hall where one of the chief masters essentially worked as the campus laundromat enforcer.
That is exactly what the historical record shows. A highly specific, temporary fix for an empty building that just calcifies over centuries into a permanent pillar of society.
Okay, so we can clearly see how physical spaces get hijacked by history. But what about intangible things?
You know what I mean?
Like, can a fleeting moment in culture intentionally engineer a massive, immediate response to an emergency and accidentally rewrite the rules of society in the process?
Oh, definitely. And that brings us to another July 13th milestone.
Let's hear it.
July 13th, 1985. Live Aid.
Ah, of course.
This was a cultural spectacle born entirely out of a desperate, fast-moving crisis.
Right. According to our sources, the catalyst for this was a 1984 report by BBC journalist Michael Burke.
Yeah, a really famous broadcast.
He delivered this horrific, completely groundbreaking broadcast on the famine in Ethiopia. He called it a biblical famine in the 20th century.
It was devastating to watch.
And that raw footage deeply moved musicians Bob Geldof and Midge Ure. They decided they had to do something immediately, which is what led to organizing this massive global jukebox.
If you actually look at how they pulled it off, the sheer logistical madness is staggering.
I can only imagine.
Right? They didn't have years to plan a permanent charity foundation. Geldof essentially willed the concert into existence through sheer force of personality, totally panicking, and just bluffing.
Bluffing? Wait, how do you bluff a global stadium concert?
By lying to rock stars, basically.
You're kidding.
No. Geldof would call up Elton John and say, David Bowie is already in, you have to do it.
Oh my God.
And then he'd call David Bowie and say, Elton John and Queen are in. None of them were actually signed on at the time, but the bluff worked.
That is brilliant.
They all committed because they thought everyone else had already committed.
That's incredible. And because it was held together by, duct tape and good intentions, it created these raw, unscripted moments that permanently altered music history.
Oh, like the U2 set.
Exactly. U2's performance of the song Bad. It was this legendary 12-minute set where Bono literally jumped off the stage into the crowd.
Yeah, because he saw a teenage girl being crushed by the surge of the crowd, right?
Right. He pulled her to safety. And that one chaotic, totally unscripted moment made U2 global superstars overnight.
And the reach of this thing was just unprecedented. I mean, an estimated 1.9 billion people watched the broadcast.
Billion with a B.
Yes. That was 40% of the entire human population at the time, all sharing a single cultural moment. And they raised an estimated 150 million pounds.
Wow.
What's really fascinating here is how a 16-hour concert, which was intended as a quick emergency fundraising fix, it permanently altered the landscape of celebrity activism. It literally created the blueprint for how culture responds to global tragedy.
But our sources also bring in some highly controversial nuance here. And I really want to ask you, listening to this deep dive right now, to think about this.
That's an important question.
Does the sheer scale and emotion of a charitable spectacle sometimes blind us to the messy political reality of the crisis itself? I mean, you have 1.9 billion people swaying to music, feeling like they're saving the world. But the reality on the ground in Ethiopia was incredibly dark.
It was. And look, we are just impartially reporting what is in the historical sources here, but those sources note that allegations later surfaced claiming much of the Live Aid funds were actually diverted by the Ethiopian government.
Led by Mengistu Haile Mariam.
Right.
Diverted how, exactly?
Well, there were claims that the money ended up funding the very regime that was exacerbating the crisis in the first place, or that it was spent on weapons and military campaigns rather than actual food.
That is heavy.
It is. Now, it is extremely crucial to note that the BBC Editorial Complaints Unit later issued an apology for some of their reporting on that.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, stating there was no concrete evidence to support the claims that money went to weapons. And the British ambassador to Ethiopia at the time strongly denied the allegations as well.
So the legacy is heavily disputed.
Heavily. But regardless of the absolute truth of where every single dollar went, it perfectly highlights the immense complexity of trying to solve a deeply entrenched geopolitical crisis with a one-day pop concert.
Right. Okay. So Live Aid is this incredible voluntary public bailout. People willingly gave their money because the spectacle moved them emotionally.
Yeah.
But what happens when a crisis demands a bailout that the public absolutely hates? When institutions are collapsing and the government is forced to step in against everyone's will?
That takes us directly into the 2008 financial crisis.
Yes, it does.
We have a really fascinating paper from the Brookings Institution written by a former senior Treasury official. It gives us this granular inside look at what happens when the financial system is basically bleeding out over a weekend.
And once again, mid-July is a major flashpoint here.
Yes. On July 11, 2008, the FDIC takes over IndyMac.
Which was a massive savings and loan association.
Exactly. And suddenly the government is staring down the barrel of a nationwide wave of foreclosures.
And they had to figure out how to handle it immediately. So, according to the paper, they created what they called a mod in a box.
Right.
I have to stop you there. The paper keeps mentioning this term, a mod in a box. What on earth is that?
It honestly sounds like a terrible fast food meal.
I know, it does. It's actually government shorthand for modification in a box.
Okay.
It was basically a standardized prepackaged toolkit for mortgage servicers to quickly modify failing loans. The government instructed servicers to target a 38% front-end ratio, which they later actually dropped to 31%.
Okay, another piece of jargon. For those of us who don't underwrite mortgages for a living, What exactly is a front-end ratio?
It's actually quite simple. The front-end ratio is just the percentage of a borrower's pre-tax income that goes strictly toward their primary mortgage payment.
So just the house payment. Exactly. So if you make $10,000 a month before taxes, the government wanted to ensure your mortgage payment was modified down to $3,100 a month.
Got it.
And to get there, they would extend the term of the loan, cut the interest rates, or offer principal forbearance.
But wait, don't people have other debt? Like, what about credit cards, car loans, second mortgages?
That's called the back-end ratio. And this
Yeah.
is where the panic comes in.
Okay.
The government completely ignored the back-end ratio.
You're kidding.
No. They knew a lot of these borrowers would still default eventually because they were drowning in credit card debt. But the Treasury just needed speed. They were totally desperate to stop the immediate bleeding in the housing market, so they pushed this imperfect mod in a box out the door.
But let me push back here for a second. If the Treasury was so desperate to stop the bleeding, why create this complicated indirect toolkit?
Right.
Why not just write checks directly to the homeowners who are drowning? Just pay down the mortgages and save the market.
Because of severe political constraints. Yeah, Congress had absolutely no appetite to write checks to underwater homeowners. In the eyes of the public and the politicians, these were quote-unquote irresponsible borrowers who had bought massive homes they just couldn't afford.
The optics were terrible.
Exactly. You couldn't politically reward that behavior.
So they couldn't bail out the homeowners directly? What did they try instead?
Well, in late July, Congress passed the Frank Dodd legislation. And this attempted to force the pain onto the lenders.
Okay.
It demanded an 87% principal write-down from lenders to refinance these bad loans.
Wow.
Meaning, if a home's value had tanked, the bank had to voluntarily take a massive, permanent loss on their books just to help the borrower.
I am guessing banks weren't exactly lining up to volunteer for massive losses.
Not at all. It proved completely unworkable. Very few loans were actually refinanced this way.
So everyone is just stuck.
Yes. The government's hands were tied by the politics of not wanting to write checks to bad borrowers. The lenders absolutely refused to take the hit, and the crisis just kept getting worse.
Which led to a terrifying standoff with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
The big ones.
Yeah, these were the massive government-sponsored enterprises that guaranteed a huge portion of all U.S. mortgages. And according to the Brookings paper, in August, Morgan Stanley delivered a bleak analysis showing both firms were deeply insolvent.
And this is the moment the Treasury realized that if Fannie and Freddie went down, the entire global financial system would literally vaporize.
Poof. Gone.
Gone. So they had to abandon all their ideological principles. On September 7th, they placed both entities into government conservatorship. And to keep them afloat, they implemented $100 billion keep wells.
Okay, keep well is another term that completely trips me up. What does that actually mean in plain English?
Think of a keep well like the government handing Fannie Mae an unlimited corporate credit card, purely to prove to the rest of the world that they won't let the company go broke.
Like a blank check.
Basically, it's a legally binding commitment from the Treasury to continuously inject capital into the firm just to keep its net worth positive. It signals to the market, hey, don't panic. We will cover their tab no matter how high it gets.
Wow. And that desperation eventually birthed the $700 billion TARP fund.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what's really vital to understand is that policymakers did not want to do this.
They hated it.
They were free market capitalists forced into a corner. By abandoning their principles over a panicked weekend to save the system, they created a massive moral hazard.
Because they proved that some financial institutions are simply too big to fail.
Exactly. That is a permanent reality of our financial system today, and it was entirely born from those panic, duct tape decisions in 2008.
Man, so we've got 2008 showing us how permanent policy gets forged in total bureaucratic panic. Now, let's look at what happens when a nation is in crisis and people try to fix it intentionally.
Right, the grand designs.
Yeah. Our sources from the National Archives give us two events that show the extreme opposite ends of crisis management.
And astonishingly, both of these pivotal historic events occurred on the exact same day.
Let me guess.
Yep, July 13th.
Let's start with careful, intentional architecture. July 13, 1787, the Northwest Ordinance.
Right.
The American Revolutionary War is over, and the Confederation Congress is trying to figure out how to handle this massive new territory they just won.
They really needed a system for westward expansion that wouldn't just create, subservient colonies, but actual equal states.
Yeah.
So, authored following principles originally laid out by Thomas Jefferson, the ordinance divided the Northwest Territory into 3 to 5 future states.
And it established a clear three-stage method for statehood, right?
Yes, ultimately requiring 60,000 free inhabitants to join the Union on equal footing with the original 13 states.
But it was way more than just drawing borders on a map. It established fundamental rights for the territory. It guaranteed religious freedom, trial by jury, and the writ of habeas corpus.
And for those unfamiliar, habeas corpus is the fundamental legal right to challenge unlawful detention.
Meaning the government can't just throw you in a dungeon without a judge reviewing why.
Exactly. And crucially, Article 6 of the ordinance explicitly banned slavery and involuntary servitude in the territory.
It was just a monumental piece of paper. It was debated, compromised on, and voted on by politicians in a room, and it permanently shaped the legal and moral geography of the United States.
It did.
But wait, let me challenge you on this for a second.
Go for it.
You're framing this as a quiet, bureaucratic success. But did it actually work? I mean, banning slavery on a piece of paper in 1787 is one thing, but didn't this exact issue just set the stage for the massive, violent crisis of the Civil War decades later?
You know, it's a very fair pushback. You're right. It absolutely did not prevent the Civil War. The execution of these ideals was deeply fraught and violently contested.
Right.
But what the Northwest Ordinance did was establish the vital legal framework that the federal government actually had the authority to regulate or ban slavery in new territories.
Ah, I see.
It laid down a permanent moral and legal foundation that leaders like Abraham Lincoln would later rely on to defend the Union.
Okay, so that is the slow, careful, legislative approach. What is the opposite extreme?
That takes us exactly 6 years later, over to France, July 13th, 1793.
Okay.
The French Revolution is just raging, and the country is violently tearing itself apart.
Enter Jean-Paul Marat.
Yes.
Our sources describe him as a physician, a politician, and a radically violent writer.
Marat published a newspaper called L'Ami du Peuple, which means the friend of the people. But it wasn't really a newspaper.
Right.
It was basically a hit list. He relentlessly attacked moderates and anyone he deemed an enemy of the radical revolution, actively fueling mass violence and executions in the streets of Paris.
And he did a lot of this writing from a bathtub, right?
Yes, he did. Marat suffered from a severe, incredibly painful skin condition, likely a form of severe eczema.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
It was. The only relief he could find was spending hours sitting in a medicinal bath. He would literally lay a wooden board across the tub to use as a desk, just writing his fiery, violent pamphlets while soaking.
And then on July 13th, a young woman named Charlotte Corday gains access to his room.
Right.
She supported a more moderate political group called the Girondist faction, and she believed with all her heart that Marat's violent rhetoric was single-handedly destroying France.
She really thought she was solving a national crisis.
So while he was sitting in that medicinal bath, she drew a knife and stabbed him right in the heart.
She truly believed that by cutting off the head of the radical movement with one decisive blow, she would somehow silence the rhetoric and save the country from chaos.
So what does this all actually mean if we weigh these two historical moments side by side? I mean, Corday's drastic violent act backfired completely.
Oh, totally.
It didn't stop the terror. Marat instantly became a martyr. He was painted in famous portraits like a saint, celebrated by his radical supporters, and Corday was sent to the guillotine. The violence she tried to stop only escalated into the reign of terror.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the Northwest Ordinance, which was this dry, bureaucratic compromise hammered out in committee, it peacefully and permanently outlawed slavery in a massive swath of the continent and laid the structural groundwork for the expansion of a nation.
Wow.
It just proves that sometimes the quiet, boring stroke of a pen is infinitely more powerful and lasting than the dramatic, violent stroke of a blade.
It's just an incredible contrast, and it really brings us full circle on this deep dive today. We started by looking at a temporary, rusting billboard for a Hollywoodland housing development and an empty preaching hall in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
We moved to the frantic, duct-taped global spectacle of Live Aid in 1985. We plunged into the desperate, panicked boardroom bailouts of the 2008 financial crisis, and finally compared the blood-stained bathtubs of 1793 to the careful legislative halls of 1787.
It's quite a journey, and I think the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner, is to recognize that history is rarely a product of grand intentional design.
It's really not.
The world you inhabit right now is largely built on yesterday's temporary fixes. Our reality is built on 18-month marketing campaigns, on panicked compromises made over a weekend to save the banking system, on spectacular concerts thrown together with bluffs, and on empty buildings repurposed just because they were cheap.
It really makes you look at the present moment differently. So I'll leave you with this. If today's permanent reality is just yesterday's temporary crisis response, look around your life in our current society. What temporary duct tape solutions are we using right now that are quietly calcifying into the permanent foundation for the next 100 years?
Hi viewers, family and friends. How did you like the content of this video? Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please write in the comments your name and the place you are watching from. Since our viewing family is spread all over the world, it will be nice to know which city and the country you are watching from, so I can say hello to you. Science and technology. Reading and listening to the historical accomplishments on this date of those who have gone before us, I, as a professional engineer with interest in structural engineering, energy-efficient buildings, ICF construction, and as Google Docs expert with interest in spreadsheet-based solutions, draw inspiration to ask of myself the million-dollar question. What would I accomplish today? Think about the Japanese practice of Kaizen. Let me know in the comments. What would you accomplish today? Your subscribing to the channel inspires me to post more such videos. Thanks for your patronage. See you in the next video. Sincerely, Yogi Anand.